Hi, let's laugh off by talking about the idea that we all have social information processing biases, and that comes from the experiences we had in childhood and adolescence with popularity. Our peers from back when we were kids are still affecting how we see things, how we interpret things, what we want, and the behavior that we engage into this day. What we are going to talk about now are a couple of very common biases that we've seen in the research literature that really tell us about why some kids with peer rejection experiences grow up to have difficulties across many domains in their lives. And the first of these is referred to a hostile attribution bias. Specifically, this is referring to the community interpretation phase. But what we found is that people with a hostile attribution bias that actually affect all the different areas of social information processing. And here is how we study it with young kids. Kids might look at a little picture like this and they read a story. These ones say, imagine you are sitting in a large table at school eating lunch. You look up and you see another child coming over to your table with a carton of milk. You turn around to eat your lunch, and the next thing that happens is that the child spills milk all over your back. The milk gets your shirt all wet. Why did the child get milk all over your back? And that story is read, and then kids are just asked, tell us why you think that happened. And then the information can be coded. Most people will say that it was an accident, the milk probably spilled, and that's how the milk all got in the bags, and it's okay. But there are some kinds that will say, no, that was done on purpose. That was done because that kid was being mean and because they were trying to get milk all over me. Here is another scenario. Imagine you brought your new toy to school today. You saved up money to buy the toy and you want to show it to the other kids at school. You let another child play with it for a few moments while you go get a drink of water. When you get back, you see that the child has broken or your brand new toy. Again, a lot of people would say, why would the child have broken that toy on purpose? It was just an accident. Somehow it just happened. But some kids that we would say have a hostile attribution bias would look at the experience and say that happened because the kid broke the toy on purpose just to be mean to me. It turns out that kids with a hostile attribution bias during childhood and adolescence, and also when they grow up, they tend to have a biased or distorted way of experiencing all the social information processing steps. So if you ask kids to look at a picture or to watch a video, and you ask them to tell you what they saw, hostile attribution biased kids will selectively see the things in their visual field that suggest aggression. If you control for how aggressive their kids were previously, we find that kids who were rejected by peers will have an increased tendency to have this hostile attribution bias. And they see more aggressive things in front of them and they fail to see positive things in front of them, kids that are maybe laughing and playing with each others. As we just talked about, cue interpretation is also affected. So when presented with an ambiguous situation, why did someone walk by and their shoulder bumped your shoulder? They will say they did it on purpose. It was to be mean, and everyone else will probably not think that. When you give them an interpretation that you say, imagine a situation in which someone was mean to you, what will you do? So in other words, we are holding constant Q interpretation. These kids with a hostile attribution bias, they are more likely to come up with very aggressive scenarios. So their goals will be, I want to get back at them, I want to make them feel bad, I want to hurt them. If you think about it, even as adults, there are ways in which people who are wrong, whether in the workplace or whether in a romantic partnership, their desire specifically to try and get back at them. That's something that we are seeing stemming from the hostile attribution bias. Even when I say to some people we want to hold constant your goal clarification, let's say that you are trying to find a way to resolve a conflict. People with a hostile attribution bias will say, well, the way that I will do it that, and they will list a whole bunch of aggressive responses. And they tend to end up doing things that are a little bit aggressive anyway. Maybe this rings true. Maybe you know somebody out there that has a hostile attribution bias. Maybe it's you. The way that we see this in adulthood, of course, we don't see people kind of beating each other up as much. That's something you see a little bit more in children and adolescents. But you do see people that tend to act aggressively. We do see that there is physical violence and also emotional abuse that occurs towards a spouse or romantic partner. We do see that there is physical violence and also emotional abuse that we do see towards kids, that people with a hostile attribution bias tend to also be aggressive towards other children emotionally or physically, but also these in ways that are a little bit more subtle. So for instance, in the workplace, we see that people with a hostile attribution bias grow up to assume that they are being kind of blown off by their co-workers, when someone might innocently forget to credit a co-worker with an accomplishment. They see that as being a specific attack, as something that happened on purpose. They were left out. It was due to some way in which they were being used, or someone was trying to put them down and thwart their ability to be promoted in the work environment. So this is how hostile attribution based bias types of people see their workplace. As a result, these are folk that don't tend to do as well at work. They come late, they leave early. Research shows that they are more likely to steal office supplies, they badmouth the workplace to other people, and they are even more likely to quit. We even now have some research to show that there may be intergenerational effects. So if the same adults have a hostile attribution bias grow up to become parents, then what we find is it changed the way that they are parents and it changed their kids. Nicole Werner did a research study where she looked at moms who had hostile attribution bias, and she measured how much moms had a hostile attribution bias when asked to interpret what happened between moms and other adults, what happened between moms and kids, especially their kids, and also when they were given scenarios and asked to interpret what was happening between two children, and they got all that information from moms, and then they found out how the kids were doing by asking these kids' teachers to complete an assessment of how aggressive their kids were. Well, what they found were the moms who had hostile attribution bias. They tended to think that kids were more likely to be hostile toward their children. So in other words, when they were asked to interpret a scenario in which their kids were interacting with other kids, and something that most people would think was a neutral exchange was occurring, these moms thought that what was really happening was that other kids were teasing their son or daughter, and they tended to respond in a way that made them feel like they needed to protect their children or they needed to fight back for their children. Also, these moms tended to say that when they got into fight with their own children, they thought sorry it wasn't because of their child expressing their needs or their child being just trying or hungry or some other reason why the child was being upset. They were more likely to think their children were being hostile toward them, toward the parent on purpose. And of course, you can imagine that changes are all about how that kid will be raised or how that mom feels about being a mom. Also, what happened is that moms with a hostile attribution bias, they tended to be kids that their kids tended to grow up to be more aggressive. The teachers independently reported that those same kids, the ones of the moms who had a hostile attribution bias, were the ones that fought more with their classmates, got angry more in their class, and tended to be more physical and more upsettable when it came to scenarios that most kids tended to not have as many problems with. So that's just one example of type of bias that we see happen in childhood and adolescence that tends to have an effect on the way that we experience things all throughout the rest of our lives across different contexts.